Hi, this is Mahipal Lunia with Immersion Talks, and today we are getting into episode 2 of the Moro Fighting Arts, as it's been starting to be called. So we have Mushtaq Ali Al Ansari here with me today again, continuing our conversations on this topic. So one of the things that I had requested Ata was for us to discuss the whole relationship between a teacher and a student and how it's in my opinion markedly different than your traditional martial arts and other arts from the archipelago. But let's just jump in with him and explore what I think is a really fun topic, very mysterious and misunderstood at most times. And so here's your chance to actually hear from somebody who has kind of grown up in the tradition for over 5 decades now. So with that, Arthur, welcome back. And figured let's talk about relationships and the relationship that is formed and created between the teacher and the student within some of these tribal and clan arts from Mindanao. So how do you want to start this off, Arthur?
Disclaimer, because you make me sound so important, and that's not the case.
Oh boy.
Yeah,
Modest as always.
Yeah, but it is important because I'm not Moro. I'm some white kid, and I can't represent Moro arts.
Correct. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I can represent what I do and what I learned. And I have to always add that caveat because I don't want people thinking that I have some sort of great secret, because I don't. I just have some stuff that I learned when I was young. And I don't think there's anything mysterious about it. It's like, put the pointy end in the other guy kind of stuff.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Atta, but yet at the same time, I think the moment we say Moro arts, there's just so much mystery around it. And so from that perspective, mysterious, I get it. And yes, like you've always told me, it's just about the most efficient way to get the pointy stuff into the other guy.
Yeah.
But with that, Atta, let's jump into the meat of today's conversation, if you will. Let's talk about this whole idea about the student-teacher relationship and how these arts were kept and passed down.
Well, in my case, and I can only speak to my case, this was not like we experience here today in the US or even in Indonesia or the Philippines today. This wasn't a school. This wasn't a place where people could go and study a particular system with a name or anything like that. It was something that a family did. And no uniforms, no belts, no ranks. Nothing that made it stand out. It was as not excuse me, as non-commercial as you can get, as the antithesis of commercial. My teacher never once charged me a dime for learning. It was just me and my friend, and he would teach us every week. And in return, I did a lot of yard work in return, I would guess. But, that was fun. But I would imagine that this was more like one would have expected 100 years ago in the South Philippines, where a family had its traditional ways of protecting itself, and they passed it down from generation to generation. And this is not to say that there aren't more formalized schools. So one of the interesting things, getting back to our friend Stiles, is when he and I first met, he wanted to check out my art and stuff. And, you know, there's not much I could tell him, you know, it's other than this is what we did. And he said that what you do is a kind of kuntawa, family art, as opposed to a formal silat system. And that helped me really understand what was going on. You know, so this was not like this big family system with major teachers and all of that, which represent the Filipino silat arts. It's what the family did. And in that sense, anybody who is practicing is like family. They aren't formal students and all of that sort of thing. If it's weird considering what we have today.
Yes. So would you care to share a little more about from your experience and what you've heard from your teacher as well about his learning, right? How the teachings happened? What was a day to day in the life of being the student and being with the teacher?
Yeah, from the few things that he said, it was very much like he taught us. Here you are with your family. Every day or every couple of days, your family, one of your uncles or your father or one of your male relatives takes you out and they work with you. And they teach you the stuff. So in that sense, this was very much like he learned, in that it wasn't formal classes. He never used a title. You know, I never had to call him guru. I always referred to him with respect as Mr. Abdus Salam, but nothing other than that. You know, no bowing, no, you know, we had a salute when we sparred, and that was pretty much it. And, you know, we did it family style. And then oftentimes, you know, I was over for dinner afterwards, which was always a good thing because he was a great cook. You've lost your audio again.
No, I was muted. So sorry. So how long did this continue, this kind of relationship?
About
And
4 years.
Did it change through time, or was it consistently like that?
It was consistently like that. I would say over time we grew closer. I thought of him as almost a second father or a beloved uncle. You know, I felt a lot like I was connected with the family. And yeah, I know it should sound much more mysterious, you know, going out and doing ceremonies and stuff, but this was just life.
Yeah. No, I hear you. So what would you say? I mean, how so your teacher would be pulled out into the backyard every few days by some elder and taught stuff, but what was your arrangement like? I mean, he had now come into a new world.
It was pretty much like that. You know, Rashid and I would I would show up with him after school, right? We would tend to walk home from school together. Walking home was probably a 2.5 mile walk from our junior high school or high school to the house. And we would hang out, and, you know, I don't think that people have relationships like that these days. You know, this was rural central California. So we had lots of stuff that we could do, stuff that kids like to do. You know, we would run around in the open fields and follow creeks and, do all of these things, get chased by cattle,
Hmm. So
and
then, go ahead. Please go ahead.
yeah,
Please go ahead.
so we expected to, whenever he felt like it, we would work out, we would train. But so it was in the afternoons, after school, on the weekends, usually on a Saturday. Saturdays when it would be when we would do things like go to the beach
Hmm.
and train at the beach or train on the rocks at the beach.
Hmm.
And it was a bit of a drive. We would go out. Our favorite beach was part of Vandenberg Air Force Base, a
Hmm.
part that they allowed regular people on. It's relatively, it was a long drive, as I remember, but it was fun.
So what is it? Like the training itself? Hard knocks, or was it gentle? What was it
Oh
like?
no, it was a lot harder than any of the way that I've trained you. I mean, if you flubbed a parry, was expected that you would get hit, so that you would remember not to do that again.
Hmm.
And getting hit stung. I mean, we weren't working full power, trying to blast through each other's blocks, but we were also not working with light rattan. Back then, you didn't have a lot of access to rattan like you do now. Now, if we want rattans, we can just drive up to Berkeley and get them from the rattan store. But then our sticks were made from eucalyptus sapling. We would go out, and the kind of eucalyptus that grows in Central California is the kind that grows really straight. People originally thought they were going to use it for ship's masts until they discovered that the wood sucked for ship's masts. And by that time it was too late. And now they use it for windbreaks and such. But the saplings are nice and straight. And we would go out and we would cut a bunch of them, peel them, set them aside to dry, and then use them till we ran out and repeat the process.
And those dried eucalyptus plants hurt. They hurt.
Yeah, they stung. And so you didn't make too many mistakes. And like I said last time we talked, the way he taught, we started slow. We started, he would have us move almost Tai Chi speed until we got the patterns of the motions down, until our bodies understood how to do it. And then we would speed up. And so by the time we were moving at a good clip, there was less chance of getting hurt, especially when we were doing particular patterns. And then when we sparred, because he was a great believer in free sparring, we sparred with wiffle bats. I don't know if you know what those are. Back in the day, who made it? Maybe Hasbro, maybe Whammo. They were plastic baseball bat things about yay long. They came with this plastic ball that had holes in it, which is where the name came from, called a wiffle ball. And they were for little kids to, play baseball-like sports without getting injured. Yeah, so the wiffle bats were light plastic, and they hurt like a mother. They stung, but they didn't do damage. You're not going to break your bones with one. But you will have some nice welts at the end of the day. Actually, the worst injuries I ever took were with a wiffle bat. Got my nose broken and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, every week we would do some sparring, just to make sure that we actually understood what we were learning. Because what happens if you don't understand is you default back to, a couple of things that you've done that have saved you before, and you're not doing the new stuff. And you have to be able to do the new stuff. And I think the brilliance of his teaching methods really involved learning on a gradient to where you could always apply what you've been learning. So you ended up with more choices.
So what about, you've taught like 2-3 generations of us, right? These arts. What about your own teaching methodology, pedagogy? How is that?
Yeah, I have taught Steve Van Harn was the first person I ever taught this to, who has sadly passed on. And then I taught his son, Cole, some. His son was so brilliant. He's now playing professional rugby up in Washington, I think now. But he was such a natural athlete, such a pleasure to teach. I remember one year we were going to a tournament and he was just going to fight sticks. It was a Filipino martial arts tournament. And then he discovered that they were going to do a knife fighting sessions. He had never done knife fighting, just absolutely wanted to do it. So I spent like 20 minutes in the parking lot showing him the basics, and he took gold for his division. He was like 16 at the time. So Steve's son Cole never finished the training, but he was part of it. Then I taught you, and you sent Jason to me, who I couldn't say no to for obvious reasons. And that's the only people I've ever shared this art with. You cannot get me to teach you this art. It's not commercial. I've never had a school to teach it. I don't care to teach it. And it will never be commercial. If you want to learn Moro martial arts, there are valid Moro teachers out there to teach this stuff to you. And I think I know most of them, and I can recommend, if people want to learn this, usually I tell them, see if Stiles is teaching somewhere around, because he's the best I know.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, for somebody who has no access to this art, and how do you describe your pedagogy now? With, I mean, right from Steve to me, and your pedagogy and the kind of connection and relationship, if you will, and how you contrast it with back in the day, the way you learned it. Because I think coming to the new world, a few things change, a few things remain the same. I'm just curious as to, I'm sure listeners are also curious as to, okay, what should they look for?
I concentrate on principles. Because the art has no angles of attack. It's not like your standard Arni sort of Screama. We don't have a numbering system. I stole Dan Inosanto's numbering system at one point just so that I had an easier way to talk about some of this. People always know what you say when you say number one angle, because it's the same everywhere. But part of, I think, this art, it asks the teacher to feel the student, to understand how they move and what is most useful to them, and to adapt because in a principle-based system, you can adapt to anyone, because you don't have a specific technique that they need to do. You have a principle that they need to understand and be able to apply. So I teach you, and you you have a background already, a good solid background in Sarada. And so those things that are similar, we can bring out. But if I were to say teach Noor, who is 4'8", I would have to teach her totally differently because she's always fighting giants. Noor being, for anybody who's listening, my wife, who is tiny.
Tiny but fierce. Don't be fooled.
Very fierce.
Yes. Yes. So if again, I mean, I've experienced this with you over the years, but this is much more for the listeners. A new student comes into you and you decide what gets you to decide, okay, I'm going to teach him or her. And then if you decide to teach him or her, what does the journey look like?
If I decided to teach somebody, I would have to have a really good reason. I mean, part of the reason that I taught you was the idea that you would take this and archive it.
Sorry, I'm listening. I'm muted.
No, that's no problem. But children are important, so it'll take a moment for you to get that sorted out.
No, but go ahead.
Yeah, so that is an important consideration because, you know, I'm sure that the art is alive and well somewhere in Mindanao. I wouldn't even know how to begin to find it. I would have to like go to Iana City and see if I could find his family somewhere and get them to talk to me. And, you know, who knows? So the art is probably around being taught in its purest form in Mindanao. But here, there's a little isolated island of the art that it should be, I think, you know, preserved at least scholastically. And so after I decide that there's some reason, then I have to get to know the person. They have to have certain qualities. They have to be a good person. They can't be somebody who's going to go out and do stupid stuff with this. There's enough stupid stuff in the world without me adding to it. And then I have to learn how they learn and how they move. That's an important part of it. You have to learn to get a sense of the student's patterns of movement. And that's the thing that we did
At the train station.
At the train station. The first few weeks was me getting a sense of what would you do if I gave you this particular kind of energy in an attack? How would you respond to it? You remember that?
Yeah, like yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah. And then once I've got all of that sorted out, you start with basics. Yeah, you start with the basic principles of the art. And this art is positional. You know, so we look at where is your weapon in your hand in relationship to your body. So let's take a basic stick. I'm holding a stick. The stick is either going to be point up, point middle, or point down generally, and point out, point center, point in generally. And that gives you a coordinate system of how to move. If my stick is in and down and I receive an attack to my head, I have to do something different than if my stick is up and out. And so learning to do what is most efficient for any attack that comes in from any arc is the first part. Along with that is the footwork. Footwork is really important in this art. I have to quote, I think it's one of the old German fencing masters, German or Italian, who said, he who stands still dies, he who moves lives. And that concept is built into this art. Gotta move. And so we're kind of nonlinear in that way. I mean, we have the straight in blast through the person kind of stuff that usually the first thing you learn, but then it's all about moving in different angles, moving in different patterns that position you to where you are protected and can create an opening to your opponent. It's not like there's nothing, I don't think that there's anything unique about that, because I studied Silat with Stephen Plink, Guru Stephen Plink, who I consider one of the finest Silat teachers in America. And he taught all this same stuff. He had more, maybe a little bit more cuts up manas added to the mix than the Filipino systems do, but it's all the same sort of thing. So this is, I think, an idea, a thread that moves throughout the archipelago in certain arts, though not all arts.
Yeah, I think that's a critical point, Ata. I mean, I think in some ways you've been blessed that this was the circle you moved in, right? But for most of the normies, and no disrespect to anybody, but most of the normies, they don't even have access to it, and feeling group link is just something out of the planet, right? I mean, until you haven't felt it, you have no idea what we're talking about, right? So I think that's a rare treat in so many ways.
Yeah,
So
I've always wondered about that. Why did God like me so much that he gave me access to some really phenomenal teachers? It's like some people have a guardian angel. I think I have a martial arts angel, a dojo bum angel.
Hey, fingers crossed. No, and like even when you introduced me to Guru Plink, it was just yes, I did see some of the threads that you talk about, right? And some subtle differences, but yes. But again, when I compare that Silat and I compare the Moro arts as we've been doing it over the years to say your standard fare, FMA or Serada or anything else, the logic is quite different. It's hard to explain. And usually the standard thing I get is, you have funny footwork. You're moving funny. It's like they want me to move the way they do.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to compare it to American Taekwondo, which is the ultimate antithesis to what we do, because their work is all technique based. It's not to say it's bad, especially if you're teaching kids. It's great because it burns off huge amounts of energy.
Mm-hmm.
Gives kids, a sense of camaraderie, all of this kind of stuff. And it is entirely technique based. In my experience, they didn't teach principles. And so this is the opposite of that. This would drive a kid crazy.
Yeah.
To learn this. If you young kids, I mean, at 13, it drove me crazy sometimes, because I just went, how do I hit him? It's like, figure out how to hit him. But how do I do it? Figure it out. You're here. He's there. How do you make the way to do it?
Hey, you drove me crazy sometimes. So I'll leave it.
Just passing it on.
Yeah. 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 So, this principle-based thing, I mean, even if you look at Guru Plink, right? I mean, it's always just a very small group of people that are around him,
Yeah,
and then he just works on you one-on-one mostly.
yeah.
I don't think this stuff can be passed down
I
in a
you
in a
cannot make a
seminar.
commercial school and do this.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Um, and I think most CLOT people have figured this out. There are some systems that lend themselves more to large group teaching, like Monday Muda works pretty well with that. At least it did. I studied Monday Muda for a while, liked it, thought it was a nice art, has all of the components that you need. Too big to learn for me. And I think Herman began changing it when he became the head of the system, to make it more compact, to not have 40,000 different ways to do things. But then he passed on, and who knows what's doing now. Great practitioners. Ibu Rita, who runs the system now, is brilliant. She's an exceptional martial artist. But I remember the last time I saw her and her husband, which was at a seminar with Dani and Asanto. They taught me so much stuff in that little amount of time. I couldn't remember anything. My head got too full, which is probably says more about me than them. But they have a vast library of knowledge.
It's one of the best ways to hide information, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the one last question here, or rather last thread on at least this podcast. Somebody listening out there is like, okay, I've done FMA for a while, or I've done CLAT for a while, and I really want to learn this Moro stuff. How on earth do they begin to look for a school, a teacher, and how do they know whether they are actually learning a Moro-based art or somebody really good with the marketing,
It's nearly impossible. You have to, first of all, find a Filipino who does this. Find somebody who's from those lines. Like, I mentioned Styles. He's from Sulu. He grew up with this. He trained with amazing people his entire life. There are people like that. They're very, very quiet. I know probably 3 guys right here in the Bay Area who teach the stuff, but they're not in the phone book, or they're not on Google, as the case may be now. So what you have to do is you have to hunt them down.
And let me tell you guys, I'm pretty persistent in trying to hunt people down. It's not easy.
It's not easy. And, it won't be me. Jason will be the last person I ever teach. Once I have you and him down, I feel like my job is done. You guys will be able to represent this art and do it proud. And so, I have no intention of teaching anybody else. I have other things that I really enjoy teaching.
Yeah.
But not this. This is private for me. This is something that was a gift given to me by someone who I was really close to, and it's not commercial. You can't just come in and say, here, have $100, give me a lesson. It just won't work. It's just not what I like to do.
Yeah.
And I'm getting too old for this stuff.
Oh, you're not. Still kick my butt. So find a Filipino, find someone who's a perhaps that heritage or has strong ties back to the heritage, what do they do
Yeah,
next? So say they
they
track this person down. Now what?
prepare for rejection.
Yes.
Because
I
the
think
first
Jason had it
22,
the easiest.
Jason did have it the easiest, but
Yeah.
he has the advantage of being
No, I
Filipino.
know. I know.
Yeah,
I'm just laughing.
yeah.
Just laughing at it. I told him the same thing. I said, dude, you have no idea what I went through. But go ahead.
Well, yeah, he came in with a really good recommendation.
So,
That was the first thing.
you're kind. But yeah, he's a good guy.
Yeah.
But go ahead,
So,
Arthur.
if you really wanted to hunt the Moro arts, I think first of all, you find a good Filipino martial arts school and you start learning the basics with them. And you start listening to, who's teaching where, who's doing a seminar, who's doing a tournament. I met Style at a tournament.
Yeah.
A good friend of mine back in Chicago used to put these things on every year before the pandemic. He called them Archipelago Arts Tournaments, or Pacific Arts, and anything from any of the islands in the middle of the Pacific. And some interesting people showed up there. And so you have a chance to meet different teachers, and you can find somebody that way sometimes. Watch TV shows. One of Styles' students was on one of these blade shows where everybody's doing these cutting contests.
Yeah.
Did remarkably well. And using a traditional barang, which it scared me a little bit because, God, the things that they have you do with those knives is just terrifying to the knife. But the blade held up really well. And so you look at him, you don't know exactly what he does, but he does something. You can send him a letter through the studio and say, hey, now let me grovel at your feet and ask you to teach me something. And then be prepared for rejection over and over and over.
A lot of time. They have to literally be fed up with you to teach you, I think.
Mm-hmm. So for most people, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. There are some brilliant Filipino martial arts teachers out in the world you can go and study with. We know what, 4 or 5 Serrata teachers just off the top of our heads between us.
More,
really good
yeah.
art. Yeah, really good art. You can't go wrong learning it. And there's a whole Inosanto blend, and all of that is out there for people to learn. So most people don't have the motivation to learn this, in my experience.
I would agree.
Because these guys, they have to think about you. They have to get to know you. So my advice is get into a good Filipino martial art, and one that goes and fights in tournament settings where there are other arts that come in and other high-level teachers who are there. Like Style never brought students to fight except for maybe once, maybe twice, but he was always a judge, and he was a great judge at these places. So you look at that, you look at who are the teachers here, and then you might be able to approach them and get rejected, and then see them at the next tournament, and rinse and repeat.
Okay, so say by some hook or crook and arm twisting, they decide to teach you. What can they expect from there? Because look, somebody fresh off the boat or fresh into the martial arts is not going to jump into this, right?
No.
It's not going to happen. So you probably have spent a decade, 2 or 3 before you arrive at these doors. So what can or should they expect when they do show up?
Expect to be tested in class. expect that your resolve will be tested. I mean, you experienced some of that. I mean,
No,
I'm
I know,
nicer
Atta.
than most people, but I needed to make sure that you would stick with it, because it's, especially at my time of life, it's not worth it for me to teach somebody who's going to learn for 6 months and then disappear and then go out and shank somebody or something.
I know my experience, Atta. I understand. I'm just trying to get this to somebody
Yeah,
who has no perspective on this, right? It's one thing to hear
yeah,
from me. It's a whole different thing to hear from you.
yeah, and expect it to be um, more of a family sort of thing. Like, to be connected to an art like this, in my experience, is to be family with the teacher, and that has its perks and it has its obligations, and you have to meet the obligations and enjoy the perks.
Fair enough. I think, see, guys, those listening to me, even though Atta said this is not mysterious, if all this is not mysterious to you, then you missed the boat. But from my experience, if I may just share Atta,
Yeah,
few
please.
things, so it was hard tracking it down. Number one. Number two, I'd done a little bit of martial arts before, and I've been around the block a little bit, but the logic system was quite different, and um, it adds a stressor which is again very different. And I think in the future podcast, Atta, the next one, I would love to do a show and tell around the weapons and what makes them unique from the ones we do.
Okay.
So like when you look at a Kampilan and you see that thing coming towards you, it changes minds, because it's very different than a rattan stick. It's very different than even a regular training weapon. Once you play with it and feel it, it moves very differently. So yes, it does test your resolve. And let's just say I had a few life incidents happen through this period, right? And that's putting it lightly, but it's one of the few things that kept me personally sane, honestly. So those of you who are truly looking for it, don't give up. No? Yeah, you'll probably be discouraged, but don't give up. I think it's worth it, but it's not for, like Atta said, it's not for everybody. It's for those crazy few. And most people tell me, when the hell are you going to take a Kampilan and go cut somebody up? I said, probably never, and I hope never. But you don't do it because you're going to war. There's a whole different bunch of reasons and motivations to do it.
Yeah, I have never walked down the street with a Compulon, not once in my entire life. But on the other hand, if you have a decent walking stick, you can use it exactly like a Compulon.
Correct.
I learned all of my Compulon technique with a eucalyptus sapling.
Yeah.
We didn't have Compulons. We did not have creases. We didn't have any of the standard tools. We had to make do.
And it's a hell of a great way to confuse your opponent. I'll tell you that much. It's just fun.
Yeah.
It's real fun. So any other closing thoughts, Atta, on finding a school or that relationships and relationship building with the teacher?
Yeah, the key is the relationship building. So like I said, find somebody who is Filipino. Try and understand their culture. Try and become a part of what they do. And then you can't go wrong, whether it's Moro arts or any of the other Filipino arts. And if it's a white guy teaching the school, that's okay, because you can follow him back to his teacher somewhere in there. But if you want to get into the Moro arts, I think you start with learning Filipino culture and learning to respect it and learning to move in it more than usual, which, in my case, most everything I know about Filipino culture is after the fact, because we didn't do any of that cultural stuff other than, have some dinner. And they were Muslim, right? That was one of the ways I got to be friends with Rashid. Was he was not accepted in the groups of Filipino kids at school who were all, Central and Northern Catholic Filipinos. He was a Southern Muslim Filipino, and there was a certain amount of animosity. So, yeah, and I came out to California from New Mexico, and there is no comparison between the two places. And so, we sort of came together. So you learn a little bit about the culture. If you're dealing with Moro arts, you have to expect to know something about Islam and to respect it. That's important. And, learn as much as you can. Like I said, in some ways, it's unfortunate that I was too young and stupid not to know the right questions to ask at the time. Because, for us, it was all about, how do I hit this guy, right? How do we use this? And I will say that me and my friend, more than once out behind the school, used the empty hand components of this moderately frequently. And yeah, so that, we're going to be talking about the interplay between the Spanish and the Moros. And that's all stuff that I had to teach myself, through research and reading and talking with people. Because like I said, I was too young and stupid to know the right questions to ask.
And I think part of also any art, Moro or not, you have to educate yourself on things, because no teacher is going to be able to teach you everything anyway.
Yep.
Yeah. And then one thing I do want to add, I know we say research it, but at the same time, I'll say this from my experience: all the Kampalan videos on YouTube, that's not how I learned it. Nothing like it.
No, which is not to say that
Dozen.
they aren't all really good. I mean,
No, I'm not saying that. I'm
yeah.
just saying that, you're not going to be doing Heaven and Earth 6
Yeah.
patterns with this. So it won't
I
move
always think
like.
of our Kampilan work as kind of boring looking in comparison to everybody else.
It works. That's the difference, though.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're boring.
You're really trying to unmarket this.
Yeah.
All right. I know.
Yeah. I want to make sure that people are clear that I'm talking with you about this because we have an agreement to archive it.
Yes.
But this is not a commercial art. You can't buy a lesson.
No. Yeah, I get approached by a few people. Oh, show me this or show me that, and then I say no. Go to my teacher. If he says yes, maybe then. Otherwise, I won't. And yeah, that's about it. And Jason, I felt he's a Jason Inay, by the way. He's a really good guy, and I felt somebody else within the culture should also learn it. Just not some random Indian guy with glasses.
Yeah, and Jason is he's such a good student.
Yeah,
he's because he has all of the wiring already installed. It's just a matter of making a few connections with him. And he's young and he's strong and he's fast and he's all of these things. So yeah, he's a brilliant student. I'm very grateful for you sending him to me.
Of course, Ata, of course. So with that, Ata, thank you again for the time. I hope this gives people a little more insight into the underpinning and the mechanics of how you might find your way with a Moro art and what to look for and what not to look for. I hope they've gotten you guys listeners have gotten a sampling of how he's been trying to discourage you from doing it. So that itself is a test. That's your clue. So, so that with that, Ata, thank you again.
My pleasure.
For some, it's the quest of an empire. For some, it's been the quest of power and riches. For some, the quest for honor. And yet for others, the quest for freedom. Blades and bladecraft have done just that. So Richard Burton has said, the history of the sword is the history of mankind. And that's the journey we are on. No blade culture has defined the world as much as the Spanish bladecraft. And yet, no art develops in a vacuum. It is shaped by those that it interacts and fights with, and also shapes the cultures whether they are conquered or manage to maintain their freedom. In this particular lab, we're going to look at how Spanish bladecraft influenced arts across the 5 continents. We've traversed 20,000 plus miles. Wharton teachers with over 700 years of combined bladecraft experience together in one place at one time, where over 3 days and 40 hours of non-stop training, you will be able to see and experience firsthand how it shaped Europe, how it shaped the bladecraft of Northern Africa, how it developed the arts, both indigenous and otherwise, in Philippines. Moving over to Latin America, from the jungles of Colombia and Panama, how the arts of machete developed. Coming further up north, looking at the arts of the southwest Mexicali region, where the long bullwhip was developed. Or looking at the development of a very American form of fighting, the Bowie bladecraft. The impact on the Asian martial arts itself, with the Chinese art being completely transformed by fencing and fencing footwork. Lastly but not the least, is looking at the biomechanics of what full contact bladecraft does, how it shapes your movement and what works and what doesn't work. This is the experiment we embark on. The lucky few who come here will get a view of 500 years of bladecraft that developed across 5 continents, and the relationship between the conquerors and the conquered, between the wannabe conquerors and the freedom fighters, between those who fought as pirates and those who fought to maintain their honor. This is that experiment. This is holy blood, holy blade. For more information,